Captain Torres had attended dozens of alien ceremonies without incident, so he was completely unprepared for the moment. The princess sprinted across the hall, wrapped her arms around him, and accidentally declared him family in front of the entire Volcari Empire. Daniel froze as Leary, his small body collided with his waist. His uniform crinkled from where she clung to it like a life raft in stormy seas. The suddenness of her embrace made every muscle tighten. Panic bubbled up inside, and he glanced over at Queen Alara Volcari standing regally beside the dais. Her eyes were wide with shock. "Daniel, you came!" Leary, his innocent voice cut through the silence that followed. "I missed you." The entire ceremony hall was frozen in an instant. A sea of 3,000 dignitaries, their gazes fixed on him, and the little princess hugging his waist like it was the most natural thing to do. "Princess," Daniel said softly, wincing inwardly at his mistake as he patted her back awkwardly. Nice to see you too." His face burned with embarrassment. This had not been part of the plan when agreeing to spend evenings teaching a young princess card games and stories from Earth. Leary, his eyes sparkled up at him blissfully, unaware of the storm brewing around them. She tilted her head curiously as she saw Daniel's discomfort. "Why do everyone look like they are in trouble?" Her silver braids were askew from running through the crowd. Daniel swallowed hard and looked toward the dais, where Queen Alara stood watching with a mix of surprise and something else he couldn't quite decipher, a hint of approval. "Princess, you shouldn't," but Leary cut him off. "I want to hug everyone. You are my friend." She giggled, clearly oblivious to the protocol. Daniel's heart sank as he realized what she was about to do next. The last thing he needed were a few thousand Volcari dignitaries suddenly hugging him like it meant something more than friendship. He had no idea how many laws or core rules this might break in such an instantaneously formal society. "A princess, you can't just," but Leary, it was already peering through the crowd to find another person she could hug next. "I want to see all my friends and family now," she declared cheerfully, tugging on Daniel's hand as if he were her personal pet to lead around the room. Daniel's eyes darted back up towards Queen Alara again for help, or at least a hint of what was going wrong here. But instead of scolding his young charge, the queen simply stepped down from the dais and made her way through the crowd with an air of purpose that could only mean trouble in human terms. Daniel's mind raced to think up any excuse that might work to get him out of this mess, something diplomatic yet non-committal. But as he looked into Leary, his wide, trusting eyes, his resolve crumbled a little more every second. This wasn't about protocol anymore, it was about an innocent child who needed some kind of stability amidst all the formality. "Princess," Queen Alara said quietly but firmly when she reached them, her voice soft despite commanding everyone else's attention without speaking above a whisper. "Why are you hugging your human advisor?" Leary blinked at her mother, puzzled by this reaction. Her tiny hands clung tighter to Daniel's waist, as if seeking reassurance from him about the confusing situation. "Because he plays games with me," Leary said simply, "and tells funny stories. I thought maybe we could." Daniel cut in quickly before she made any more inadvertent political statements by adding details of their time together. "Princess, perhaps it's best if you stay close to your mother now and let the ceremony continue." His voice was gentle but firm. Leary looked from Daniel's face back up at her mother's expressionless one, finally catching a glimmer of concern in Alara Volcari's eyes that matched his own. She pouted slightly, looking torn between wanting to hug everyone and following orders. "But princess," the queen interrupted again, gently but with authority. Daniel took a deep breath and looked at Leary one last time before stepping away from her reluctant grasp. He knew it was for the best. Her mother's eyes met his over Leary, his head, gratitude and warning in them both simultaneously as she guided her daughter back to the dais where they resumed their previous place. Daniel turned towards the dignitaries who were now starting to move again after a few tense moments of confusion and staring. He saw several Volcari with narrowed eyes his way, not exactly an encouraging reaction from people used to being treated like royalty themselves. His mind racing, Daniel tried to think about how he could possibly salvage this diplomatic disaster in the making before it escalated further, and who was responsible for him knowing so little of what had just set into motion. As he made a mental note to do some serious protocol catching up after all this was over, Daniel noticed a few figures at the back of the room whispering urgently. Among them were the Imperial advisor and his sister, both known to be close allies of Queen Alara. The Imperial advisor's eyes met Daniel's briefly, as if signaling him, telling him without words that someone here had clearly planned for this exact scenario ahead of time, despite everyone else being caught off guard by it. But even in their quiet conversation from afar, the urgency and tension were palpable. Daniel stepped forward towards them cautiously, aware he was now part of something larger than a simple diplomatic mission gone awry. He needed to understand what had just happened, and how best to avoid any more unexpected declarations of familial bonds with Volcari dignitaries in future meetings. The hall buzzed back into life around him as the ceremony continued, but Daniel's mind was already racing ahead several steps beyond this momentary mishap towards potential solutions and deeper questions about what exactly had just transpired and how it might change everything going forward. Captain Daniel Torres felt a sudden chill as he stepped back into his place among the dignitaries after Princess Lyria's unexpected hug. The room had fallen silent, and all eyes were on him. Volcari guards moved in silently around him, their armored forms casting long shadows that seemed to grow with each step they took. Lyria clung to Daniel's waist as if she was a child holding on to her parent during a storm at sea. She looked up at the crowd of Volcari, gathered near them, each face an unreadable mask. Her violet eyes, wide and innocent, blinked in confusion. "Why are all these people looking so angry?" she asked softly. Daniel swallowed hard and patted Lyria's back gently. "It's okay," he murmured to her, though the words felt hollow even as they left his lips. He knew exactly why everyone was acting this way, but there was no easy explanation for an 8-year-old princess caught up in a world of politics beyond understanding. The Queen Alara Volcari approached slowly from across the hall, each step calculated and deliberate. She wore her formal court attire, emblazoned with symbols that spoke of power and authority. As she neared them, those symbols did little to temper her imposing presence. Her silver hair was tied back in an intricate braid, though it looked somewhat askew now from the day's events. Queen Alara's eyes were unreadable when they finally locked onto Daniel's face, but there was something else, a flicker of gratitude and warning combined into one intense stare. "Why are you hugging your human advisor?" she asked quietly yet clearly to her daughter. Lyria looked up at the queen with wide-eyed confusion. "Because he plays games with me," Lyria answered simply. She added quickly, "and tells funny stories." "I thought maybe we could," Daniel interrupted gently before the princess said something else that might deepen his predicament. "Princess," he started, "perhaps it's best if you stay close to your mother now and let the ceremony continue." Lyria looked between Daniel and her mother, who had a similar expression of worry on her face. She pouted slightly but nodded reluctantly as she took hold of Alara's hand. Alara Volcari glanced down at Lyria, then back up to Daniel with an unreadable gaze before leading her daughter towards the dais where they resumed their place for the ceremony. The queen's voice was soft yet commanding as she guided Lyria, who looked over her shoulder once more toward Daniel with a lingering look of confusion and hurt. Daniel turned his attention away from them, taking note of several Volcari nobles around him narrowing their eyes suspiciously at this sudden turn of events. He could feel the tension in the air as everyone waited to see how he would handle the situation that had just unfolded. His mind racing with potential consequences and diplomatic fallout, Daniel decided it was best if he sought out someone who might have some insight into what had happened. Stepping forward carefully, amidst the guards still surrounding him, he began moving towards a cluster of Volcari nobles whispering urgently at the back of the hall. He recognized them as Imperial Advisor Tharv and his sister Illyria, both known to be close allies with Queen Illyria. Imperial Advisor, Daniel said loudly enough for others nearby, but not so much that it would attract unnecessary attention beyond those who needed to hear him speak directly. I need a moment of your time. Tharv turned at the sound of his voice and nodded curtly, signaling Illyria with one hand before leading Daniel away from curious onlookers. Once they were alone in a quieter corner of the hall, Tharv's expression softened slightly. He was known for being an astute strategist, but also someone who valued loyalty among Alice perhaps more than protocol itself. When it came to close friends and family members like Captain Torres had now inadvertently become overnight. What exactly did I do? Daniel asked urgently once they were out of earshot from the rest of the gathering room. I know this must mean something specific here, but none of your protocols mentioned anything about Hugs declaring anyone as family. Illyria stepped closer and placed a hand on his arm in what might have been intended to be reassuring had it not come across more like cautionary support instead. This was planned, she said quietly. Daniel's brow furrowed deeply with confusion at her cryptic statement. Planned? Tharv nodded slowly, eyes reflecting understanding that Daniel himself did not yet possess. There are those among our people who have long believed it is time for a change of attitudes towards humans specifically and outsiders in general. He paused thoughtfully before continuing. Some believe you might be the catalyst to bring about such change. Daniel stared at Tharv as though he'd grown two heads. But how? How did they plan this? Illyria answered with an air of finality that left no room for alternative explanations. For years now, there have been whispers, discussions, even plans drawn up in secret circles advocating closer ties between Volcari and humans based on shared values beyond merely strategic alliances. She continued, as if Daniel had nodded his agreement to every word. She spoke without question. Your influence over Princess Leary has not gone unnoticed by these people. You represent a new kind of hope for many who see your connection with her as more than just casual friendship. Daniel's mind reeled at this revelation, struggling through the implications, while trying hard not to show his distress outwardly lest it be mistaken as weakness. And what exactly does that make me now? He asked quietly. Illyria's hand tightened briefly on Daniel's arm before releasing him entirely with a nod towards where Queen Illyria stood watching over her daughter, still from across the room. For better or worse, you are now seen by some factions here as something far more significant than just another human advisor. You symbolize their vision for what lies ahead. Daniel stared back at Illyria and Tharv long after they turned to leave him standing there alone once again amidst the sea of Volcari nobility. A chill ran down his spine, knowing now that this incident was far from an isolated event, but rather a pivotal moment in both diplomatic relations between humans and Volcari, as well as internal political dynamics within their empire itself. He took one last deep breath before turning back towards the ongoing ceremony, resuming his position among the other attendees while trying to remain outwardly calm despite everything swirling through him internally. The weight of this newfound responsibility hung heavily upon him now more than ever before, and he had no idea how or even if would be able to shoulder it. But one thing was certain: whatever came next for Daniel Torres in his role as a human ambassador at the Volcari Imperial Court, nothing could prepare him for what lay ahead until this moment of unexpected familial declaration by Princess Leary. And perhaps that very unpredictability might just serve as both blessing and curse going forward into an uncertain future where diplomacy was no longer simply about protocol, but deeply rooted in the bonds forged between individuals across species lines. As Daniel watched the ceremony continue, he knew his journey had only just begun, and with it came a new challenge to navigate these complex waters, not merely as a diplomatic representative of humanity, but also potentially as someone bridging gaps and fostering understanding where none previously existed. Path ahead was fraught with peril yet filled with promise, a delicate balance that would require every ounce of wisdom, courage, and compassion he possessed if there truly were hope for lasting peace between worlds. And so Daniel Torres stepped forward once more towards an uncertain, but undeniably intriguing future intertwined deeply now with Princess Lyri, a Volcari's young heart, and the grand hopes resting upon both their shoulders. Captain Daniel Torres stood rigidly in place as he watched Princess Lyri, a Volcari's arms tighten around him like a vice grip of joy and innocence, her small body nestled against his waist for what felt like an eternity. The entire room had frozen in shocked silence at the audacious breach of protocol. Human military advisor hugging the imperial princess, and now whispers were turning into tense murmurs as Volcari nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Daniel's heart pounded hard and fast, his mind racing through a torrent of conflicting emotions. Relief that Lyri was happy despite knowing she'd broken every rule by coming to him like this. Fear over what would happen next for both himself and the princess he cherished so deeply without fully understanding why. In that moment, when everything around them seemed to stand still save their beating hearts entwined in shared affection, all Daniel could do was gently return her embrace with a hand cradling the back of her head. But as quickly as it had begun, his joyful hug came to an abrupt end. She pulled away from him just enough to look up into his eyes, and saw them widen slightly before turning towards where her mother stood watching over everyone else. Her innocent joy dimmed ever so subtly at seeing the rigid posture of Queen Alara Volcari against the ornate backdrop of royal regalia, all vibrant colors starkly contrasting with the tension-filled air surrounding Lyri. As unexpected display. "Mommy," she called out tentatively yet without apology in her voice. "Why are you looking like that?" Queen Alara's expression softened ever so slightly, but only for a moment, as if an internal struggle waged within her before shifting back to one of reserved displeasure. "Lyri, my dear," she began slowly, and with careful control over each word, "do not speak now." But Lyri, was far from being the type who could be silenced easily, even when caught up in some unforeseen predicament. Instead, she turned around fully facing Daniel, then pointedly at her mother before repeating herself aloud enough for everyone present to hear clearly. "Daniel is my friend. He taught me games and told me stories about his world. I didn't do anything wrong." In that one moment when Lyria's words rang clear across the ceremonial hall, all eyes turned not just towards Daniel, but on to Princess Lyri, Volcari herself, her young self, completely unaware of how her simple declaration had shattered any remaining pretense regarding protocol and cultural boundaries. The entire audience was now divided between those who were outraged by this sudden affront to tradition versus others left bewildered at such a bold assertion from someone so small yet carrying within them an enormous amount of weight. High Advisor Crathel, whose influence rivaled only that of the Queen herself, approached swiftly with purposeful strides. His eyes narrowed sharply as he surveyed both Daniel and Lyri, before addressing Queen Alara directly without ever breaking eye contact. "Your Majesty," he intoned formally, yet distinctly lacking any hint of respect his usual tone bore towards their sovereign ruler, "this human has clearly corrupted our heir, seduced her with earthly trinkets and tales of foreign lands. He must be dealt with immediately." Daniel could feel Lyri tense up against him at Crathel's words, even before she began to struggle free from his grasp out of sheer desperation to defend those closest to her heart. "No," the princess cried desperately, pulling away far enough that only one arm remained entangled in his waistcoat, while turning fully toward High Advisor Crathvel. "That's not true. He taught me how to play cards and chess, and he reads books about Earth which are funny and exciting. And Mommy has never been this happy before until now." Her voice broke slightly at the final proclamation, but still managed to ring clear enough that everyone in attendance could hear her claim of newfound joy from spending time with Daniel. This simple statement alone was more than anyone present expected to ever witness coming forth so openly. It served as an indictment against those who sought to punish this human merely for befriending their beloved princess. Queen Alara's eyes softened again, a visible shift occurring within them upon hearing her daughter speak thus confidently in support of Daniel's presence and influence over her well-being. She took one step forward from amidst the sea of Volcari nobles surrounding her, but still maintained enough distance to keep control over this delicate situation. High Advisor Krathvel, she began carefully, each word chosen precisely before continuing further into what many hoped might serve as some form of rebuke toward his aggressive stance. While I understand your concerns and the gravity they hold within our society's code, this child has spoken freely from her heart. Her happiness under Captain Daniel's guidance is not something we should overlook lightly. Daniel felt a wave of relief wash over him at seeing Queen Alara advocate on behalf of both herself and Leary. But also understood that this was far from being resolved. Rather, the political implications were just beginning to unfold in earnest. Krathvel's face contorted ever so slightly with displeasure as he bowed his head toward Alira briefly before turning back towards Daniel. "Your Majesty," he said slowly through gritted teeth barely concealed behind outward politeness, "then permit me this: if Captain Torres continues teaching Princess Leary such things, without due regard for our customs and laws, how do we ensure that future interactions maintain integrity?" Daniel could feel the pressure mounting once again as everyone waited anxiously for Queen Alara's response. Would she side with Krathvel's cautionary viewpoint, or allow this moment of familial affection to stand amidst broader implications regarding cultural exchange? Alira took another step forward now, her voice carrying through clearly when speaking directly towards Daniel, without ever breaking eye contact despite addressing all present equally. "Captain Torres," she began formally, but then softened into something far more personal. "Your presence here is indeed a matter of delicate balance. However, it has become evident that your influence upon Princess Leary brings both joy and stability, a rare commodity in recent times." Leary looked up at her mother with renewed hope as Alira's words seemed to affirm the unspoken bond between Daniel and herself. But Queen Alara continued before either could breathe too easily, "Let this not be taken lightly by all parties involved. Both Volcari nobility and those from Earth seeking peace through understanding must tread carefully moving forward." Daniel nodded respectfully while keeping a watchful eye upon Leary, who seemed to draw comfort now knowing her mother supported their bond openly yet also recognized the necessity of respecting boundaries between cultures. High Advisor Krathvel narrowed his eyes even further before bowing deeply once more towards Queen Alara. "I will ensure these matters are discussed among the council," he stated firmly before stepping back and resuming position amongst other nobles waiting for direction from their ruler regarding this unprecedented turn of events. Queen Alara turned finally to face Daniel directly now, her eyes softening yet remaining guarded within them. "Captain Torres," she said with clear deliberation in each word chosen carefully, again like moments earlier, "you are dismissed for the moment, but know you will be expected at a council meeting tomorrow regarding your role here moving forward." Daniel bowed respectfully, without hesitation, before turning to gently guide Leary back toward her mother, who extended arms warmly, this time welcoming her daughter closer despite any lingering tensions still present amongst attendees. As Daniel began backing away towards the exit, he knew full well that his involvement with Princess Leary had just become infinitely more complicated, yet also far richer than anything he could have ever anticipated upon first accepting this diplomatic assignment. His path ahead would now require navigating treacherous political landscapes while maintaining delicate relationships within a royal court where affection often carried significant consequences. beyond mere personal bonds. But perhaps amidst all the uncertainties lay an unexpected opportunity to forge genuine connections between worlds that transcended centuries, old customs, and prejudices through simple acts of kindness, compassion, and mutual respect, starting with Princess Leary, a Volcari's unshakable belief in her human friend who changed everything simply by being there when she needed him most. And so Captain Daniel Torres stepped out into the corridor outside of this grand ceremonial hall, filled now not only with hope, but also determination to face whatever lay ahead, as both a representative for his own kind and someone deeply intertwined within Princess Lyria's journey toward adulthood, amidst an ever-evolving galaxy ripe for new alliances born from shared experiences, rather than old enmities entrenched in rigid traditions. Captain Daniel Torres emerged into the grand corridor of Volcari Imperi Il Court, his heart heavy and mind racing as he processed the events that had just transpired in the ceremonial hall. His mission was meant to be straightforward: promote diplomacy between Earth and this formidable alien species, but now it felt like a complex puzzle with pieces shifting and sliding out of reach. He could still feel Leary, his warm embrace, her silver braids tangled around his uniform as she clung on to him. Her bright violet eyes had shone with an unbridled joy that pierced through the formality of their surroundings. Daniel knew he couldn't leave without addressing this monumental situation. It was a choice between preserving protocol and honoring trust. As soon as he reached the safety of his temporary quarters, Daniel pulled out his communicator to send an urgent message back to Earth Command, explaining what had happened in hopes they would understand that staying on Volcari might be necessary for diplomatic relations. He didn't have time to overthink. Every second felt critical. However, before he could press send, the door slid open abruptly. In walked Princess Leary, herself with her mother close behind. The Queen's expression was a mixture of sternness and understanding as she gazed at Daniel expectantly. "Captain Torres," Queen Alara began in a calm but commanding voice, "I am aware that you have just been through an ordeal unlike any other for someone from Earth." Daniel nodded, trying to meet the gaze of these regal beings without betraying his nervousness. "Thank you, Your Majesty," he said respectfully. "I understand how this must feel," Queen Alara continued softly, her eyes flickering towards Leary, who held Daniel's hand tightly now, as if seeking reassurance herself. "In Volcari culture, a child's choice of family is sacred." Daniel gulped visibly at those words and glanced down at the princess, whose grip tightened around his fingers. She looked up with hopeful innocence into his eyes. "Leary has chosen you," Alara said gently but firmly. At this statement, Daniel's heart clenched painfully in his chest. He had no idea what such a choice entailed for him or her. His mind raced through the possibilities of how deeply involved he would now be bound to Volcari politics and cultural expectations. "Captain Torres," Alara spoke again after noticing his silent struggle, "you are faced with an important decision. You may choose to resign from your position here on Volcari, or remain committed to ensuring this alliance progresses positively." Daniel's stomach churned at those words. Resigning would mean leaving behind a confused and heartbroken Leary, but staying might require him to navigate uncharted territories of interstellar diplomacy far beyond his initial training. Queen Alara stepped closer, her voice softening with sincerity, as she added, "You have my word that your actions here will be respected by our people. Yet you must know the weight this decision carries." Leary tugged gently on Daniel's hand, breaking him out of his reverie. He looked down at her and saw a mix of hope and fear in those big purple eyes. "Daniel," she asked softly, "you don't want to leave me?" Those words were like daggers piercing his heart. Could he really abandon this little girl who had found such comfort in him? Recalling the joyous laughter they shared during story time or the mischief-filled games of cards, Daniel felt a surge of resolve mixed with trepidation. His thoughts flickered back to his own childhood, lonely and isolated despite being surrounded by people. He remembered how desperately he wished someone had taken that chance on him. Then perhaps now was his opportunity to offer Leary more than just stories, but also the warmth she so clearly craved from a parent figure or something akin. Daniel took a deep breath, steeling himself against whatever future awaited if he chose to stay. Then with clear determination in his voice, he responded decisively. "Queen Alara," Daniel said respectfully, as he bowed slightly before her once more, "if staying means that I can continue supporting Leary and fostering understanding between our worlds, then yes, I will do so." Lyria's face lit up immediately at this declaration. She flung herself forward again to embrace him, this time with less fear of protocol, but an equal amount of joyful relief. Queen Alara watched the exchange silently before stepping closer once more. "You have chosen wisely," she said finally, with a small smile, acknowledging Daniel's decision, not only for her daughter's sake, but also towards building new bridges between their worlds. "Then what do I need to prepare?" Daniel asked pragmatically after releasing Leary from another hug. Alara stepped back and looked at him seriously. "You must learn our ways more deeply than ever before, understand the intricate dynamics of our nobility, and most importantly, ensure that you maintain a balance between respecting Volcari culture while also remaining true to your own values." Daniel nodded solemnly in response, already aware of how challenging this path would be, but undeterred by it. "I will begin my training tomorrow," he affirmed confidently. "Whatever else needs doing from here, let me know." With that declaration came a sense of purpose for Daniel, as well as an unspoken bond between him and Leary, deepened further under the watchful eye of their queen. Queen Alara gave them both one last assessing glance before speaking formally yet warmly. "For now, rest assured, there is work to be done, but also much learning ahead. I will leave you in peace for tonight." Daniel bowed once more respectfully as Queen Alara turned and walked out gracefully into the corridor outside, her steps echoing slightly against the pristine walls of Volcari Court. Left alone with Leary again, Daniel knelt down so he could look directly at her level now. Her violet eyes were shining brightly, yet also showing signs of worry beneath all the joy she felt sharing this moment together, just as a family would do under different circumstances anywhere else in the universe perhaps. "Leary," Daniel began gently, "I'm going to need your help with some new things tomorrow." She nodded eagerly, pulling back slightly now out of excitement rather than fear or confusion. Smiling brightly up at him still, she responded joyfully, "I'll teach you everything I know about Volcari culture. We can make it fun." Daniel chuckled softly despite the serious nature of their situation, genuinely touched by her willingness to share what was important to her. "Yes," he agreed warmly with another hug from Leary, at this time full of mutual affection and understanding. "Let's do that." And so began a new chapter for both Captain Daniel Torres and Princess Leary. The Volcari, a challenging path indeed, but one filled nonetheless with potential growth, friendship, and unexpected alliances born out of shared experiences across the vast expanse connecting two very different worlds. But beyond this immediate moment lay countless possibilities yet to unfold. Daniel stood in his quarters that evening, staring out at the starlit expanse beyond Volcari's towering city walls. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions and questioned surprise, confusion, excitement, fear. He had never expected to be adopted into an alien royal family, but Queen Alara's words lingered in his thoughts like an echo. Just before dinner that night, Daniel received another summons from the Queen's chambers, this time accompanied by a request for him to bring Leary along. As he and Leary walked down the grand corridors of Volcari Palace hand in hand, she chattered about card games and stories while Daniel listened intently but mostly remained lost in thought. When they arrived at her mother's quarters, Queen Alara was waiting, sitting regally on a raised platform with attendants standing respectfully behind. The room itself radiated an aura of power and authority that made Daniel's heart thud loudly against his ribs. Queen Alara observed the young princess clinging to him as if he were a lifeline, her violet eyes brimming with happiness despite the weight of what was happening around them. She nodded toward one of her attendants, who discreetly began preparing something on a side table while the queen's gaze never left Daniel and Leary. "Captain Torres," she said softly, but firmly once everyone had settled into an expectant silence, "I wish to adopt you as part of this family by Volcari law." Daniel blinked several times before whispering, "Your Majesty, do I understand correctly? You want Mimi to become officially related to the royal line?" Leary tugged on his sleeve in confusion. She had never seen her mother look so serious, and decided it was better not to interrupt. "Yes," Queen Alara confirmed with a rare smile that softened her typically austere features. "If my daughter chose you as family, then family you shall be." A collective gasp escaped from the attendants nearby, but no one dared speak up against their queen's decision. Daniel swallowed hard and glanced down at Leary, who stared back expectantly. "Are you sure about this?" he asked hesitantly, his mind racing through all that it would mean legally and culturally for both them and Volcari society as a whole. "I am," Queen Alara replied evenly with another glance at her daughter. "This adoption ceremony will be private to begin the process." She motioned towards one of the attendants, who stepped forward, holding out what appeared to be a small device resembling an intricate bracelet covered in glowing symbols. "Captain Torres needs only place this around his wrist and state aloud our royal name," Queen Alara explained. "It's then considered official until further rites can be held." Daniel felt leery, squeezed tighter at the news, as if she could sense his hesitation. He met her bright eyes with a reassuring smile, knowing that whatever happened next was going to impact them all profoundly. "Very well," he agreed quietly, after taking a deep breath and looking once more towards Queen Alara for confirmation before reaching out to receive the device from one of the attendants. As soon as it touched his skin, an electric hum filled the room, followed by a surge of power that made him shiver slightly, even through his uniform. "Volcari," he stated clearly, but with respect and sincerity directed toward Leary's mother, who nodded solemnly in response. The bracelet glowed brighter for several seconds, before dimming back down to its original form, now fully integrated into Daniel's system. At this point, everyone present knew that the adoption was official according to Volcari law. Queen Alara spoke up again formally, but warmly. "From here on out, you will need extensive training in our ways, as well as a deeper understanding of how we govern and live." Daniel bowed deeply once more with respect. "I'll begin my lessons tomorrow," he vowed aloud before turning back to Leary, whose violet eyes shimmered brighter than ever. "Leary," Daniel said gently, after releasing her from another tight hug, "what does this mean for you?" The small princess beamed proudly despite any lingering worries within those bright orbs of hers. "It means that no one can take my new daddy away," she declared firmly while clutching his hand tightly in reassurance. Daniel squeezed back softly, with a mixture of joy and unease bubbling inside him over the gravity of such a statement coming from an 8-year-old child queenlet. "Does this mean I will stay forever?" he asked her seriously, though not daring to hope too much given the complications involved on both sides. She nodded quickly, almost frantically in her eagerness for certainty. "Yes, yes, please." Daniel smiled warmly down at her, then turned his attention back towards Queen Alara, who watched him closely, waiting for a response. "Then yes," he agreed solemnly with another quick hug from Leary, at this time full of mutual affection and understanding. With that, the ceremony concluded just as quietly, but more emotionally charged than it began. The attendants stepped forward to escort them out once again, leaving Daniel alone briefly, while Queen Alara turned towards her daughter, gently squeezing a hand between their fingers reassuringly before stepping aside, allowing him space with Leary, who still clung fiercely. "Leary, he said softly, kneeling down so they were at eye level now. "We need to discuss something important." She pulled back slightly, out of natural curiosity, rather than fear or confusion, but her violet eyes reflected concern despite the joy she felt over their familial bond being solidified officially. "Okay," she responded quietly. "Your mother and I have a lot we need to talk about, many things that will change our lives together," he explained carefully, trying not to overwhelm her with details while still making sure she understood what was happening. She nodded solemnly, in understanding before leaning forward again, giving him one last hug tightly around the middle. "It'll help you understand everything, Leary," he promised earnestly, releasing him once more to stand beside Queen Alara, who watched this exchange with a soft smile tugging at her lips, but also evident pride and relief coloring those features. "Thank you, Princess," Daniel said respectfully, bowing slightly before turning back towards the Queen herself. "Your Majesty." Queen Alara nodded briskly in acknowledgement, while Leary had grabbed his hand, pulling him along excitedly as she began talking about teaching Daniel all kinds of new things related to Volcari culture and society. The trio walked out together, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, but united by bonds that went beyond the cultural divide separating them. As they moved through the palace corridors towards their next destination, a palpable sense of hope and possibility hung in the air, a promise fulfilled between worlds despite all odds stacked against it from the very beginning. "Father," Lyria's voice cut into his thoughts, breaking him out of reverie, yet again pulling Daniel back fully to reality, where two lives intertwined now forever. He glanced down at her, smiling gently as he squeezed her hand reassuringly in return, knowing that this moment marked not just a new chapter for himself, but also an era opening up fresh opportunities between their worlds. With hearts full and futures bright with potential growth amidst uncertainty, Daniel Torres embraced his role within the Volcari royal court, ready to forge ahead courageously into whatever came next alongside Princess Leary, as they faced challenges together. In the days following Lyria's unexpected declaration at her formal ceremony, Captain Daniel Torres found himself navigating a complex web of Volcari politics and cultural traditions that he had never anticipated. His hasty hug from an innocent place in his heart suddenly became the focal point of every conversation within the palace walls. Yet amidst all this turmoil, one thing remained clear: Lyria's embrace had brought him closer to her than any protocol or tradition ever could. The news spread quickly, and with it came a series of unexpected consequences that would reshape both Daniel's life and the Volcari Empire itself. News of his new status as an honorary member of the royal family reached every corner of society, stirring up feelings of admiration for some and envy in others. But none were more vocal than Krathvel, who saw this development as a direct threat to his ambitions. Krathvel had always planned on seizing power through traditional means, be gradually winning over key members of the council with promises of wealth and status. However, when he realized that Daniel's presence at court could be used against him, he decided to take drastic action. He launched an ill-conceived coup attempt aimed not just at overthrowing Alara, but also eliminating anyone standing in his way. The palace was plunged into chaos as Krathvel's forces made their move. Knights and guards clashed fiercely through the halls, while cries of alarm echoed from every direction. Yet amidst this pandemonium, Daniel found himself on the front lines alongside a group of loyal knights who stood staunchly by Queen Alara's side. "What are we fighting for?" he shouted above the din to one such knight as they engaged an opponent together. "Why should I care about all these people? They don't understand me." The knight glanced at him, his expression grim but sincere. "They fight because you do, because their children look up to Princess Leary and see in her something different from what Volcari society has ever offered. Somione, who's brave enough to stand against the tide of tradition, just as she did when she called you family." It was then that Daniel understood. He wasn't merely protecting a queen or princess, he was defending an ideal, one where love and acceptance weren't confined by bloodlines. And in doing so, he became not only Lyria's adopted father, but also the protector of every child who felt alone within their world. Krathvel's coup failed spectacularly, as parents across the empire rallied around Daniel, seeing him less as a foreigner encroaching on their customs and more as someone breaking down barriers for future generations. The Volcari revered loyalty and strength above all else, and Daniel's unwavering support of Leary during this crisis solidified his standing within that framework. In the aftermath of the failed coup, Daniel moved into the palace proper, officially becoming a part of Lyria's family unit. His room was situated near her chambers, so he could attend to any needs she might have throughout the night. He continued teaching her card games and telling stories about Earth, but now these sessions were interwoven with moments of quiet reflection where they talked openly about fears, dreams, and everything in between. One evening, as Leary prepared for bed, her formal braids loosened into a messy bun atop her head, joined her by the window overlooking the starlit palace gardens. "What do you think will happen when I'm older?" she asked curiously, leaning against his side. Daniel thought about it before responding honestly. "I hope you'll be ready to lead your people with wisdom and kindness, just like your mother does now." She nodded solemnly, then glanced up at him with those violet eyes that held a world of wonder within them. "What if I'm not? What if everyone expects too much?" He smiled gently, brushing back her hair from where it had fallen across her face. "They won't expect perfection, because no one is perfect, not even me or your mother. But what they will see in you is courage and heart, qualities that matter more than anything else." Their bond grew deeper with each passing day as Daniel became not just a mentor but also a confidant for Leary. He attended her lessons, sitting quietly in the back of classrooms to observe how she interacted with teachers and peers alike while offering support whenever necessary. One particular afternoon during history class, Leary struggled with understanding some ancient Volcari customs regarding diplomatic relations between planets. Frustration etched itself onto her youthful features as she tried grappling with concepts far beyond what she was prepared for at age 8 human years old, equivalent to 12 in their society. Daniel stepped forward then, sitting beside her and explaining things from a fresh perspective that highlighted the commonalities rather than differences between cultures. "Think of it like this," he suggested gently after class ended. "When we meet new people on Earth, whether friends or strangers, there's always something about them that feels unfamiliar at first. But once you learn more, discover what makes them tick, it becomes easier to connect." Leary had tilted her head thoughtfully as she considered his words, then looked up into his eyes with newfound clarity in hers. "I want people from different places and backgrounds to feel understood too," she said quietly, looking out the window at a gathering of children playing outside. "Exactly," Daniel nodded proudly. He knew that Lyria's empathetic nature was one of her greatest strengths. As future leader, and ability he hoped would inspire unity rather than division across borders, both physical and ideological, in years to come. As days turned into months, then years, Daniel stayed by Alara's side through countless ceremonies where his presence served not only as a symbol but also practical support for Lyria. The Queen often consulted him on matters of state, too, recognizing the unique insights he brought from beyond their worldviews that challenged preconceived notions while offering innovative solutions to complex issues. One day, weeks after Krathvel's failed coup attempt had been quelled by loyalists and Daniel's own intervention, Queen Alara summoned him into her private chambers. She sat behind a large desk piled high with scrolls bearing reports from across the empire, but glanced up immediately upon his entry. "Why did you stay?" she asked directly, eyes piercing yet curious, as if searching for an answer that went beyond mere words. Daniel shrugged lightly, though there was no denying the sincerity in his expression when he replied. "She needed someone to just be normal with her," he said simply, referring both to Alara and Leary, whose lives were anything but typical due to their roles within Volcari society. "I know what it's like to feel alone." Her eyes softened at that admission, understanding washing over her countenance before she studied him further, considering all they had been through together. "You would have made a good father," she noted quietly. After some time, he smiled sadly, in acknowledgement yet also gratitude for such high regard from someone who embodied leadership itself within their world order. "I always wanted to be." With those few words, the exchange ended but lingered long afterward, leaving both parties with much to contemplate individually and together as they continued moving forward amidst ever-changing circumstances surrounding them. Years later, during Lyria's coronation ceremony, a momentous event marking her transition from princess to queen, atmosphere crackled with anticipation. The grand hall was adorned in vibrant colors, reflecting the unity felt throughout their empire under renewed leadership based on mutual respect rather than rigid adherence to outdated norms. Standing beside Queen Alara, Daniel watched as a younger version of himself walked toward center stage alongside Lyria, who now stood tall and confident in body, in qualities she had inherited from both sides yet uniquely her own. She caught his eye, then winked at a human gesture he taught her long ago when they first met, signaling everything that this journey meant, not just for them personally, but also symbolically between two very different worlds bridged together through love. Lyria caught his eye, and winks, a human gesture he taught her. She taught him something too. Family is not about blood. It's about who runs across a crowded hall to hug you. As she ascended the dais flanked by dignitaries representing various planets, Daniel felt an overwhelming sense of pride knowing that this young woman was now poised to lead with wisdom born out of understanding difference rather than fearing it. In every challenge they faced, from protecting against threats from within their ranks to fostering connections beyond them, Daniel and Lyria forged a bond unbreakable by any cultural gap or political maneuvering. Their story became one not merely told, but lived, an enduring testament that family transcends boundaries set even in the most rigid societies. And so as they watched Princess Lyria officially becoming queen, Daniel knew he had found his true purpose. His heart and soul belonged here now more than ever before, despite all odds stacked against them initially. For it wasn't just about changing Volcari traditions or integrating humans into their society. Instead, it was about teaching each other that sometimes breaking rules is necessary for growth, that every family can be made anew through acts of kindness and courage. Years later, as Queen Lyria reigned alongside her mother's wisdom and Daniel's unwavering support, the empire thrived under a new paradigm where diversity wasn't just accepted but celebrated. And at its heart stood two figures who once seemed worlds apart yet together paved a path towards unity for all, proof that sometimes it takes an outsider to show us what true belonging looks like. And